Thank you.
Call to order. Let's start with the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call.
Chairman Bordenaro,
Here.
Commissioner Daly. Here. Commissioner Beach.
Here.
Commissioner Arsenowitz. Commissioner Erickson.
Here.
We have a motion to adopt the minutes of the May 31st, 2022 meeting.
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. So on item 3, I thought that we would start with the town manager's red lines, and you can take us through, your red lines, and then we'll discuss other items, of course, but.
Yeah, thank you. Good evening, everyone. So Jeff's actually going to walk through that document, but I really appreciate him redlining and taking our comments and redlining it. But we will, Kate and Kevin Delaney's on the Zoom call. If you have to jump in, clarification, expand on anything, we'll do. Just as a background, these changes are there to, make things more efficient, make government more friendly, get things done faster, and also, remove any steps that really don't add any value to the process. So with that in mind, what I think will be helpful, and some of these you have seen before, we have talked about it. Jeff will go through page at a time, and then we'll jump in and expand, and feel free to ask questions. So today, we're not asking you to adopt any of these or take a vote. Just we'll present, you'll ask questions, and then later as a committee, as a commission, you can discuss and decide what you want to do with it. All right, Jeff, over to you.
Hey, thank you. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
So as Arosh indicated, and as I mentioned at the meeting last Thursday, this red line version that you have in front of you now, which if you look in the header, it says version June 3, 2022. This contains the red line edits from the town manager, the town clerk, the finance director, and the town attorney, plus the comments that were made by your commission at its June 2nd meeting last Thursday. So let's just go do a page turn, starting with section 2-8, which should be bottom of page 12, but I'll refer to the section because sometimes when you print these, the pagination can change. So section 2-8, Board of Education. This was a direct result of the discussion that took place at last Thursday's meeting. And the discussion was around the concept of switching from a nonpartisan board to a party nominated board. So if that's something that you eventually want to consider in the draft report that you'll eventually vote to send prior to the next public hearing, the way that you would accomplish that would be fairly simple. You would delete the existing language referencing starting with no party designation and to the end of the section, and replace it with one sentence, which is the method of nomination, voting, and election to office shall be as provided in section 9-204B of the general statutes as amended. So that's what that change would look like. The next change is section 3-8, general powers and duties of the council. This is a change that was requested by, well, really everybody. And that has to do with the bid threshold. And you'll see the red line simply changes the threshold from $10,000 to $25,000 or such greater amount as is authorized in the Connecticut General Statutes. You'll recall at last Thursday's meeting, there was discussion about, gee, how do we make this so we don't have to keep coming back with a charter revision every time the statute gets raised? This would accomplish that because this bid threshold, 25,000, is capped by an applicable statute. And if the legislature were to change that 25,000 to a higher amount in the future, having the language in here or such greater amount as is authorized in the Connecticut General Statutes would allow us, without adopting an ordinance, without revising the charter again, to increase the town's bid threshold to whatever the max is under the statute. I've had other towns say to me, well, what happens if all of a sudden the legislature goes from 25,000 to 100,000 and we don't want 100,000? And after I chuckle a little bit and say, do you have any idea how many years it took to get from 1,000 to 25,000? I tell them that if that happens, then we can just adopt an ordinance that sets a cap that's lower than the statutory max. If at some point in the future, there's a concern by the town council about the statutory max. The next draft edit is in section 4-4-1. This has to do with the Board of Finance qualification and election of members. This came from me. We talked last time about the language that is applicable to one of your members right now, which is the Board of Finance. While members of the Board of Finance members cannot hold another elective or appointive office, nor be an employee of the town. Nor be an employee of the town is in there for good reason. There's a state statute, incompatibility of office, and the only incompatibility of office defined in the statute with respect to Board of Finance members is salaried town employment. So that needs to stay. But, from my perspective, there's a whole lot of committees, ad hoc or otherwise, that would benefit from having a Board of Finance member serve, such as a building committee. We frequently in other towns see building committees on large capital projects, whether it be a school or otherwise, have a Board of Finance member. But certainly a Board of Finance member should not simultaneously serve on the Board of Education or the town council. That would clearly be a direct conflict. So the recommendation there is to narrow that so that it expressly prohibits being a member of the town council, which is the town's legislative body, or being a member of the Board of Education, whose budget the Board of Finance sets.
So Jeff, can I just stop you there for a minute?
Sure.
In regards to this, so in the meeting minutes from Thursday, I had recommended that we look at eliminating the Board of Finance for the reasons that I stated, as well as the fact that it had come up at the public hearing. And I noticed that the Board of Education and the way the Board of Ed is going to be comprised, it'll be partisan, was crossed off, but yet my suggestion of eliminating the Board of Finance was not. Can I ask you why you didn't do that?
I didn't understand that there was a consensus to do that.
I thought the vote for the Board of Ed wasn't necessary.
It wasn't.
Okay, so I'm not quite sure, what is consensus? It's the final vote. So that's correct. I'm a little confused. Consensus is a vote, and we shouldn't have taken a vote on the Board of Ed. We weren't consensus on the Board of Ed either, theoretically.
Well, I think
When I say consensus, I say that when I'm either sitting in a room or like I am now, participating in a meeting remotely, and it's clear to me that the majority of the public agency has a particular preference, that to me is a consensus. I did not, and this is just me, nobody talked to me about whether to eliminate the Board of Finance or not. My sense was that there was not a consensus on it. That's why I didn't make the edit.
Okay, my understanding was that we heard from two other commissioners that evening, Commissioner Bordenaro and Commissioner Daly. And then, of course, I spoke and Commissioner Arasimowitz spoke as well. So I'm just asking the question.
Yeah, well, the answer is I didn't sense that there was a consensus. If my sense was wrong, then nothing's been voted on yet. That's what we're here to talk about. So if you want that edit made, I can certainly go back and edit it for you.
Well, there wasn't a consensus. There wasn't. So I know that Ms. Daly spoke up, I spoke up, Jeff didn't speak up, but he can speak up right now. If you like.
Well, my thoughts were already quite eloquently pointed out before, so I didn't see any reason to repeating them. I find there's great value in having the expertise of and the finite research and looking into on the finance board to be able to present to the council. And as far as what I've heard about council having plenty of time and this and that, from what I've seen, they've got to work with. So I think they appreciate, I'm guessing, I know at least one of them very much so appreciates having a finance committee to do their job. Oh yeah, definitely. No, we voted on it. I thought we did a vote actually.
Yeah, we did do a vote on the Board of Ed. I agree.
We had consensus on that. But yeah, I'm in line with keeping the board of finance.
Okay, you want to continue, Jeff?
Sure. The next draft edit is on section 5-1, which is appointment of the town manager. And this is a simple deletion of the requirement that the manager be a resident of the town of Berlin. The edit after that, same page, section 5-3, duties of the manager. This is, you'll see later on, this 5-3D is very vague. There is an annual financial report that is required by statute. What's in 5-3D isn't very clear as to what it's referencing. So what we did was we proposed to clean up the charter on this item by eliminating the reference in 5-3D and then clarifying the reference to the proper terminology from the statute, as you'll see when we get deeper into the charter. 5-5, purchasing and payments. Again, this has to do with increasing the threshold for procuring goods or services without going out to bid from $10,000 to $25,000 unless otherwise provided under state law. The next edit, if you recall, we talked about taking the reference to the fire marshal out of section 6-9, since the fire marshal is not a part of the fire department. And we made the provision concerning the fire marshal section 6-10, and then made 6-10, 6-11. So that's just taking an existing provision out of 6-9, making it a separate provision because the fire marshal is appointed by the manager and really has duties and powers by statute rather than under the purview of the fire department. The next edit is 611-2. When I say 611, I mean the new numbering, Department of Finance. This was a request from the finance director. These divisions may be headed respectively by a town accountant, a town assessor, and a collector of revenues. There is no town accountant. So that was just an obsolete reference. And the edit better reflects the organization and reality of the structure of the finance department. The next edit in that same section, 611-2, is a request of the finance director. to have the financial report for the fiscal year be submitted within 180 days of the end of the fiscal year instead of the existing 120 days. And again, that better aligns with state statute and the reality of closing the books and generating the fiscal year end financial report. The next draft edits in 611-4, Department of Finance pensions. This adds to the requirement for amending or altering the pension system, the Board of Finance. I think this is just an edit that was missed in 2016 when the Board of Finance was reinstated. And it just has the council approval, so the Board of Finance ought to be in there. And then the sentence at the end of 611-4 is significant. This provision would require the Board of Finance and the town council to include the actuarially determined contribution in the annual general fund budget. Kevin Delaney can explain the history of this a little bit. My understanding is that this was requested across the board as a addition to the charter and is just simply a best practice and good planning. 611-6, Department of Finance bond authorization and borrowing. The proposed edit is in subsection B. And this is a deletion of the requirement that finance or capital leases be approved in accordance with 611-6, because really 611-6 pertains to bonding. And the process that's set forth in 611-6 really isn't applicable to finance or capital leases. So the finance director's request was to clean up this section by deleting subsection B.
So can I ask a question on that one? So
Sure.
does that show up anywhere else or is it just deleted? I mean, or there's no responsibility with respect to capital leases or I don't mean no responsibility, but where do you address that?
Kevin, you want to respond to that?
Good evening. That would be handled as we handle any other contract. So it would require town council approval, as well as ensuring that there's funding in place with both Board of Finance and the town council through the standard budget process.
So is it in the charter or is it just a standard procedure outside the charter? Is that what we're saying, Kevin?
Well, it would fall under the $25,000 provision.
Okay,
Anything that falls into there would have to be approved by the council.
okay, thank you.
This really is, sorry.
The basic premise when it comes to municipal spending is, which is pretty much mirrored in the charter, is a very simple, probably 70-plus-year-old statute, 7-348, Connecticut General Statutes, which essentially says that no officer, no town official, no town employee shall obligate the town to incur a liability or enter into a contract in an amount in excess of the amount appropriated for that item. So, when we talk about capital or finance, we talk about leases, okay? You would need to comply with the $25,000 threshold, but before you ever even got to that point, you'd need to have an appropriation in place to fund that item. Otherwise, it would be an illegal obligation from a statutory perspective.
Okay, understand.
Okay. The next item is in 611-7. And this is just a couple of minor items. One is referencing finance director or his designee instead of finance director or town accountant, because there is no town accountant. And the second one is in the last sentence, a deletion of the words or making, so that the provision, every payment made in violation of the provisions of this charter shall be deemed illegal, and any official authorizing such payment to or any part thereof shall be liable to the town for full payment thereof. The request from the finance director was to eliminate the words or making, because as I indicated, the statute 7348 provides that the person that commits the town to incur an expenditure for which no appropriation has been made is liable. And the concern is that we don't want the finance director or people that are cutting checks that if they're directed to pay an obligation, the intention is not to hold them liable. And so the concern is that if somebody's cutting a check, are they making the payment? So that's a requested edit to clarify who exactly would be liable in a situation where a payment is made in violation of the charter. 611.9. This is the annual comprehensive financial report, which used to be known as a CAFR, used to be known as the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report. However, CAFR has been determined to have some derogatory meaning historically, and therefore the reference is now Annual Comprehensive Financial Report. So that's just a cleanup edit to reflect the new terminology in the public accounting world. Section 7-1, routing of annual budget requests. This is a request again from the finance director that we change the 5th day of January to the 1st day of December for department appropriation requests in connection with the budget process. The next draft edit, excuse me, is section 7-6. This is something that was discussed at the meeting last Thursday with respect to the annual town budget referendum. There seemed to be a consensus for having a threshold of voter turnout, voter participation. So what I did was in 7-6D, I added language that says that the budget shall become the appropriation of the town unless at least 15% of the electors of the town vote, and a majority of those voting vote to reject the budget, either because it is too high or because it is too low. And the reason that I say because it is too high or because it is too low is because Berlin has availed itself of the statutory option to include questions on the budget as to whether the advisory questions, but questions nonetheless, as to whether they voted no because it's too high or too low. And then likewise, the following sections, E and F of 7-6, I amended to reflect that 15% voter turnout threshold. So if this is something that you're interested in looking at further, this language is consistent with what other municipalities that have voter turnout thresholds in effect. So what would happen would be if 15% or more don't turn out, then the budget that is sent to referendum becomes the budget, becomes the appropriation. And obviously, if 15% or more do turn out, then whatever the majority vote to do with the budget is binding on the town. And then likewise, in F, we deal with a scenario where you have a joint meeting between the council and the Board of Finance. And I put a provision in here consistent with the discussions I had with the town manager and the finance director, that if the council doesn't adopt the budget by the fourth Tuesday in May, then the budget as submitted by the town manager shall be deemed adopted as the town budget. That's just to close a loophole. We always want to make sure we have a budget in place so we can get tax bills out. The next draft item is in section 711. And this again is a request from the Director of Finance. And it reflects the fact that we're in 2022 and what things cost. So right now in 711, if we want to incur an obligation that we haven't made any appropriation for, it's not in the budget. Right now, anything that's greater than $25,000 requires a town meeting before the council can vote on it, despite the fact that the Board of Finance approval is likewise required. So this would increase that threshold from 25,000 to 100,000 and increase the cap from 250,000 to $500,000. Also within 711, right now for budget transfers, which is a scenario where you have not overexpended the entire appropriation, but you need to transfer between departmental budgets. Right now, the transfers have to be made in the last 3 months of the fiscal year. That never really made any sense to me. The finance director suggested 6 months. And that makes a lot more sense because again, you're talking about not transferring from the unappropriated fund balance, but transferring from within the appropriation that's either been approved by the voters or otherwise adopted by the town. So 6 months gives the town the latitude they need. And then the last sentence in that middle paragraph of 711, again, is more of a cleanup. This applies to transfer of unencumbered funds from one item of a department budget to another item of the same department budget. So now we're talking about line item transfers within one department. Right now, those require approval of the manager, the town council, and the Board of Finance. That's pretty cumbersome for line item transfers within a department. So the request from Town Hall is to have those line item transfers, again, intra-department line item transfers, be authorized by the town manager. So it wouldn't require town council or Board of Finance approval. The last paragraph.
One question on that, how do you then reconcile and keep track of this? I mean, is that presented in our normal meetings that we have, the Board of Finance? If there are transfers, so at least we're aware of those transfers?
I mean, the way it's done in other towns is, yeah, it's in a monthly report. And you're like North Haven, for example, intra-department transfers is a category of a monthly report that the Board of Finance sees. So they would see what line item the money came from, the remaining balance in that line item, what line item the money went to, the new balance in that line item.
Okay.
So I would imagine Kevin would probably envision something similar.
Absolutely.
Okay. And then the last paragraph of 711, again, this is an operational thing, as the town manager alluded to in his opening remarks. Right now, the manager is authorized to make transfers from one line item to another within any division of a department budget, but there's these 3 guidelines. No transfers will be made to hire additional staffing that hasn't been properly authorized by the council and the Board of Finance. That's a no-brainer, right? Transfers won't be made to purchase major pieces of equipment specifically deleted by the council or the Board of Finance. Again, it's kind of a no-brainer because we're not going to circumvent the legislative body or the fiscal authority by making transfers to fund things that the legislative body and the Board of Finance didn't want to fund. But then there's also this last provision that says the manager's authority to transfer shall be limited to $5,000 for any single transfer. And that's just in this day and age, ties Arosha's hands too much. So the request was to delete that limitation. The next draft edit, the last one in finance section, is 7-15. Again, this is just cleaning up the terminology. The way it reads now is that the manager will prepare and publish an annual town report that includes comments and recommendations of the auditor, general purpose financial statements, and the notes of the financial statements. No issue with that. That's a statutory obligation. And the annual report of the collector of revenue in detail as required by law. Again, no issue with that. It's a statutory obligation. Then there's also this provision that says, and all appropriate annual reports by boards, commissions, committees, and elected or appointed officials, which are submitted by a date specified by the manager. I mean, my understanding is there is some document that gets generated, but I don't know that it's provided by all boards, commissions, and committees, certainly not by all elected or appointed officials. So it just doesn't seem to have any relevance, certainly not in section 7-15, because it's not referring to a financial report. So the proposal is to delete that sentence. The next item has to do with the Berlin VNA, and that is in section 8-17. At last Thursday's meeting, the commission's attorney, Steve Mednick, had a very good suggestion, which is to, instead of deleting the Berlin VNA, have a provision that indicates that the section 8-17 provisions will sunset, will cease to exist upon adoption by the town council of an ordinance covering public nursing services. I talked to Steve today. He expects that he'll have that language for us by Wednesday. And that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. I guess, we're gonna just probably need a little time to absorb some of this,
Absolutely.
So if we have any questions, we'll follow up, in the next meeting. But I do have a couple things that I want to talk about also. On section 2.8 with the Board of Education.
Yep.
I guess the question I have is, should we be transitioning to a 2-year terms for all 9 members eventually, just like we do with the town council? That's a question.
Are we gonna look for consensus on that? Because theoretically, we really won't be able to do that, because Mr. Bernardo is theoretically not a part of the commission.
I am tonight.
Well, but it's violating the charter tonight.
Well, we can at least talk about it then. How's that?
But he already got consensus from Thursday's meeting, correct, Jeff? You got consensus.
Well, I
From
got
someone who
consensus
was
that
on-
it was, I got consensus that it was something to redline for a preliminary draft.
Based on 3 people saying they were for something, two saying they were against it when theoretically, and admittedly, Mr. Bordonardo explained that he could no longer be on the commission. He was planning to sit on it Thursday night and tonight. But I don't know if that necessarily means we can say that we've come to consensus until we have the new member appointed.
Well, again, I just want to be clear, when we talk about, I use the word consensus, I'm talking about just me making a draft of something. I'm not saying that there's a consensus that this is what you want in the report that goes to the town hearing or to the town council. So,
Then
You know,
then I'm
when I-
even
when
more
I-
confused because you used the word consensus. I'm just going back to what we had referenced earlier in regard to the Board of Finance. And you referenced consensus.
for purposes of creating a draft,
I understand. Yes, I understand. But we did talk about the Board of Finance as well. And you referenced consensus when it came to the Board of Ed and not with the Board of Finance. So I just want to be clear in regards to how we're proceeding. And I know the timeline is really tight. With these meetings, we don't have much time. I don't even know if it's worthy to look to the town council and ask them for another week. In fairness to someone else, being appointed, hopefully tomorrow night at the town council meeting. That person's coming on board Wednesday and really has very little time to kind of catch up and get that consensus, so to speak, as you're talking about.
I think that we can get that person up to speed pretty quickly. We have enough documentation here, enough information that we can get that person up to speed. I'm not uncomfortable with that. I'll sit with that person myself too, if I have to, But we do have a tight schedule, and I think we can do it based on according to the current schedule, not extend it another week.
And I understand that, Sal, and I appreciate all that you've done. It's a violation of the charter right now. And, I'm a person of integrity. So part of me sitting on a commission is, I don't want the townspeople to look at this in a way that says, you're on a charter revision commission, yet you can't be, and you're contributing, you're facilitating, chairing, participating. And I appreciate your comments. I'm not saying anything about it. I'm just saying a resident looking in is saying, why is he even chairing a meeting if he theoretically is violating the charter by even being on the commission? And that's not your fault. You were appointed. No one picked it up except, I guess, you, Kate, and I know Jeff as well. So,
Yeah, well, we did make the decision to have me chair for these meetings until tomorrow night's town council meeting and I thought we had, a consensus there that I would chair till, tonight, and then that's it. And then they'll pick a new, chair tomorrow night and move forward. And I understand what you're saying, I understand what you're saying.
yeah. I just,
But
I'm a person of integrity, that's all. And it is a violation of the charter. Let's be honest. We can't deny it.
I would like to say that we haven't finalized anything. We're talking about discussions. We're trying to keep things rolling forward with a tight timeline. I think that this does give that opportunity for the town council to make another appointment and to continue moving forward. Certainly when that person comes on board, that discussion will continue with that person's input, and will create, that opportunity for his or her contribution, going forward until we end. I wanted to go back to the Board of Education. As we discuss these things, I realized, or I thought, as the attorney has mentioned, that it was draft rolling, and each week, if we look at it, we want to make another change until it's final or till we bring it to conclusion to provide to the town council, that it's still a working document. And so I agree with the comments on making it a 2-year role for the Board of Education. It's consistent with a lot of other boards for the town of Berlin. And I think being consistent with, making it the availability of Republican, Democrat, or whatever party that they run under, that it would be a good addition, helpful to going forward for that Board of Education.
Any other comments specific to that?
Just from my experience of being on the Board of Ed for 9 years is, it's a lot. It's a real lot. And usually by year 2, you're just getting it. So I always felt a 3-year term was appropriate. I can't speak, for everyone on the board, but generally members that I've spoken to kind of felt the same way, because there's a lot of information. There's a lot of things you have to learn, especially if you're new, just running and get elected to a Board of Education. I just want to say that. I don't have a
Okay.
decision either way, but
Thank you. Well, we're not going to make a decision this
Right.
evening
I
anyway,
put
so.
this on that though, is to make sure that you're aware that usually it's very different here. We have the Board of Ed elected 3 members every year, whether it's presidential, gubernatorial, or municipal.
right.
So if you're number 1, and it can be introduced, there's not a problem with it. But a 3-year term would be off cycle. So you want to keep it either a 2-year term or a 4-year term, so that it stays with the municipal election. That's just in conversation. If
Okay.
that's something to go ahead
All right, thank you, thank you. Okay, so the other item, you gave us some revisions associated with, Kate, you give us revisions associated with question 5 on the last, charter revision.
Yeah.
And I didn't get a chance to really look at them that night, so I have, I kind of like the 2.9 revision, which is the first item on the question 5. Do you have this, Julie? This was, this was given to us the last meeting.
Oh, okay, yeah.
This was given to us last meeting with respect to. Okay, so on section 2.9, the first phrase says any candidate regardless of party affiliation who has been endorsed by major political party, either individually or as part of a slate of candidates, shall be considered a member of that party for purposes of determining minority representation as set forth in this charter. So I'm in favor of, this section, along with, I guess there's another section with the petitioning candidates. But I'm in favor of including this as a revision in the current proposed, charter.
So explanatory to all 5 questions. All right, so if anybody didn't bring that from the previous meeting, it would be in this one under question number 5.
Okay. The other, so I'm making comments if anybody wants to, comment before I make my next comment. The other section that I liked under question 5 was the 3.8. I know we didn't go with the complete language, but on the second sentence, 3.8 is general powers and duties of the council. On the second sentence, it says new language, all town labor contracts, including all Board of Education labor contracts, must be presented to the council for its approval unless prohibited by state or federal law. I do like that language also. And so one of the reasons why, as we talk about, during the budget process, how the majority of the budget is labor intensive, whether it's 60 or 70% on the Board of Education and the town side. So at minimum, the town council should have, look at, what these labor contracts are going to, result in.
At least for the last couple of years since I've been town manager, every time a new
sorry.
contract is approved, we give it to the town council, whether it's in the language or not. But I have no objection to it, absolutely.
Okay.
I think it makes everything highly visible with what's going on and everyone's on the same page. So it just confirms that's an important step, I think.
Okay,
Point of clarification, after I said that, I realized we have not given any Board of Ed contracts.
So currently what happens is that anytime I receive the labor contract for Board of Ed, a copy is sent out to all the council members. And it's,
Got it.
so they are aware of it, whether or not they act on it.
okay.
And if I understand correctly, Attorney D'Onofrio, they could act on a teacher's contract if they wanted
Yeah.
to.
Yeah, there's a limited time period to reject it. And if they don't reject it during that period, it's deemed adopted. I can tell you, in most towns with a town manager, town council form of government, those Board of Ed labor contracts do go to the town council for approval. And it can be helpful in negotiations to have that as a position as well, that this is a contract that's subject to town council approval.
I guess, Kate, you're saying we send it to the council, but not part of the meeting agenda, right?
Correct.
It's emailed. And I'm sorry to say this, I'm not sure how many people actually read it. So make it part of the agenda. That's what you're saying, right?
Yes, yes,
Formally give it
yes.
the package.
The next one that I liked was 4.2, Board of Education. This gives the Director of Finance let's say, no, maybe hold on a second. Maybe this is not the one. Just let me, I apologize. Yes, this is, I'm sorry. This is language really is associated with the Director of Finance being asked, asking Board of Education for financial information in whatever format that he may see fit. So I thought this would be a good one to include. I can tell you from my experience, the current report that we do get from the Board of Education really don't tell the Board of Finance much, on a monthly basis. So that's the reason why, I do want to include this language.
I can tell you that in a couple of towns that I work, this has been something recommended by outside auditors that have done Board of Ed audits. So this is certainly something that's not at all unusual to have as a standard practice. I can't say that it necessarily is found in a lot of municipal charters, but as a practice, I think it's pretty standard.
Okay, thank you.
And just a question, the first part of that on section 4.2 would remain the same, but the Board of Education of the town is responsible for the conduct of the yeah, okay.
The other next section is 5.5 on purchasing and payments. I thought that new language was helpful too. So I don't think you included it in your red line, right?
It is.
That particular language?
Yeah.
Okay, maybe I missed it. Okay.
So where did this come from, this one
This,
that we got the other night from Kate? Okay.
So
Yeah.
it came from me, and this was the explanatory text for the questions from 2016.
But there's new language in here, so.
This is what was giving out to our voters as far as the different questions.
Okay, so these are things that didn't make it into the 2016.
Question 5,
Yeah, they were,
question 5 did not pass.
right, in pass.
Okay.
Okay, the other, okay, so that's, what I thought may be useful to put in, as revisions. The other thing that you, Arosh, you sent to us, an email from the registrar's office.
Yes, I'm just forwarding that to you. It was given for me to just administratively pass it on to you.
Okay.
I think it's in your package. There are 2 topics. One has to do with
Referendum.
polling stations. Sort of makes sense economically.
Yes.
Have one place, and second one has to do with the Board of Ed.
Yep.
So,
I mean, the first one, based on our experience of how many people come out for the referendum, what do we have, 500-600 voters this past time, out of about 15,000. Even the 15% that we're putting in there is not a lot, so I'm in favor of having one polling station. So,
But
but
it does indicate at the registrar's discretion. So it's not definitively
right.
one polling.
yeah, in
place.
case something changes, I don't have an issue with
And then
that.
the other part of that has to do with coordinating with the Board of Ed to have the schools closed on referendum voting day. Again, just if we could kind of leave that loose so that there could be a discussion between the registrars and the school. I know the schools set their calendars 2 years in advance. It may take a little bit of time if this is something that gets incorporated for that to be worked out. I don't disagree with it, especially in light of school safety these days. We might want to think about that.
Okay.
And then the last part of it, I did get a phone call from Christy Miano in regards to the Board of Education being moved to a bipartisan board. She does not support that.
Okay.
Unfortunately, she did not read the email before it was sent out. So
Okay.
she just wanted to make sure that I was clear on that. So I did speak with her today.
Okay, thank you. So those are the extent of my questions. Joe, you're just in time.
Near the end, Joe.
Okay.
Yeah. So
I was down at EDC. It took longer than I thought it would.
So I have a question in regards to section 7.7-5, the town council approval joint board. Near the end, it talks about at which meeting the budget may only be revised with the approval of at least 9 members of the joint board. Could we change that language to be a majority of the joint board as opposed to 9, specifying a number and just say majority?
I'm sorry, what number again, please?
Section 7-5, it's on page 29 if you're looking at your hard copy, but it's section 7-5. And it talks about the joint board of the town council and the Board of Finance. And so if, it gets rejected, there has to be this joint board that meets. And it says that the budget may only be revised with the approval of at least 9 members of the joint board. I guess the number 9 is throwing me off. Can we indicate that that should be majority?
7 and 6, it's 13. So majority would be 7. I'm wondering if there's a reason why it's 9, a higher number than a simple majority.
Yeah, 7 and 6 is 13, right?
Right.
Yeah,
So if you have 7, that's a
7
majority.
out of the 13 would be,
And-
but why do we need a number? Can we just say majority?
Is there a reason, Jeff, why for a joint meeting of the council and the Board of Finance, why that requirement is there? Higher threshold because 2 bodies need to agree on something? I don't
No,
know.
I mean, I always assumed when I saw that provision, when I became town attorney 6 years ago, many times you want what's referred to as a supermajority for a really significant decision. So I always assumed that more than a simple majority was opted for by whoever wrote that because they thought that the budget was significant enough to require more than a simple majority. But there's no statutory reason for it.
If I may,
Arosh, Oh,
I
sorry.
think it has to do with the fact that there's 7 members of the town council. And the simple majority would mean the council could do it. This way, by moving it to 9,
Gotcha.
and it would be even if you have all 7 council members, you have to have somebody from the Board of Finance.
And
That's what
also,
I remember from
Okay,
6 years
That
ago.
makes sense.
and I would also add, if you had 4 from the council and 3 from the Board of Finance, same party could vote with 7. You have 9, you need 2 from the other party.
Yep.
That's right.
Okay.
Could be the same
See what I
political
mean?
party.
yeah, okay, all right.
Okay.
I just never understood the 9.
It probably makes sense to keep
It
it.
does say that it's a joint meeting of the council and the Board of
Yeah.
Finance, so you need to have council members there, maybe not all. And you need to have Board of Finance members there, maybe not all, right? Some people can't attend that perhaps. So that's why I was thinking, can't we just say majority as opposed to 9? You're really limiting it in regards to people's availability for a joint meeting if it does run to that.
I mean, the explanation on a 9 just made sense to me, so you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I understand that, but most of us have been involved in things and sometimes you don't get people at meetings and then what happens? They have to cancel the meet, just in order to get at least 9.
I'm comfortable with the 9, but you can take it up in the next meeting. No. I'm comfortable with the 9. So,
Yeah, I think what the point that Kate raised is a very serious point, which is that if it goes to a simple majority, which is 7, then the council could, without one vote from the Board of Finance, control the vote.
okay. So are there any other questions for any commission members on anything else? Joe, you may have a lot of questions. We can catch up with you after. But no, if you have any questions.
I am not gonna hold you up
Okay.
because of my tardiness.
All right, no, I
Mr. Chair.
understand. Okay. All right, any other questions? So what I suggest is, we've introduced a lot of changes. And then through your report, through Jeff's explanation, and I propose a few more additions and so forth. That we at least revise the charter for the next meeting, as a preliminary proposed charter, and then kind of start making decisions, on these items incrementally, I guess. Fair. Okay.
Is that what the commission wants me to do? You want me, those items from question 5, those 4 items, 2-9, 3-8, 4-2, 5-5, is that the consensus from the commission that I should go ahead and redline those in so you can see what that would look like at your next meeting?
Yeah, I agree. I think I would appreciate seeing that written up
Okay.
within the paragraphing. That would be helpful. Thank you.
Okay,
Jeff?
thanks.
And then the only other thing is we'll have to look at, we talked about Board of Education 2-year terms or 3-year terms, we'll have to look at that. So, okay. With that, may I have a motion to adjourn, unless there's any questions from anyone else? Okay. With that, I make a motion, have a motion to adjourn. Second,
Second.
all in favor? Aye. Thank you. Pleasure.
Short stint.
Good night, Jeff.
Thanks, folks. Good night.
For the
Thank you,
meeting.
Jeff.
Thanks.